So I spoke with our from the team, a while ago in terms of like how we can encourage other Muslims, to get involved in like the tech ecosystem overall and how they can, utilize their resources, their tools, and their backgrounds to like build meaningful, applications and resources. How we can help others, and how we can encourage others to do so. So basically, what I'll be giving a talk today about is essentially our journey at Tarteel, kind of just giving a brief overview of what we went through and some of our learnings and where, you yourselves could be involved. There's, you'd think with Muslims, like all that matters is like, okay, the Salah, the Quran, and like, you know, doing your fasting, but um, there's a whole, infrastructure behind that needs to be put up and set up in order to actually deliver value to Muslims. So hopefully we'll be touching on that. A bit about myself. I started out in like my tech journey in Northeastern, where I worked in like robotics and AI. I was an electrical engineer. I taught myself programming, and my first job out of college was a software engineer. So I started to masquerade as a software engineer, in disguise, disguised as an electrical engineer at AWS. When COVID hit and the pandemic hit, me and basically some of my friends out in the Bay Area decided to, get together and work on Tarteel. Early on, it was just like, a side project, and then it kind of kicked off into, a full-time role. And, I'll be explaining the journey right here. Let's get started. Bismillah. So the title of my talk is, like I mentioned, Reigniting the Islamic Golden Age, and some of the context that I just gave hopefully kind of helps you understand why I titled this talk this way. I'll get started basically by describing, the current situation of Muslims around the world. So you have 2 billion Muslims, that, read and recite the Quran and, pray for the most part, almost every day. But one of the main issues that Muslims have is, we're a huge, diverse community, and 84% of the Muslim world doesn't really speak Arabic natively. We've seen along those lines, as well, practicing Muslims, they're systematically persecuted, whether it's in China or in Bangladesh or in different regions, and just for practicing their faith at a very basic level, they're persecuted for what they believe in. If you go on digital spaces, Reddit, or even sometimes Twitter, they're very hostile to people who want to research, learn, and practice Islam. Digital solutions, we've seen a lack of trust in many digital solutions due to the lack of authority. The Muslim Pro issue that happened, the Muslim Pro scandal, some of the Qibla app scandals, where basically these apps are just harvesting data and selling it over to directly or indirectly the U.S. military or other data brokers and whatnot. So there's a lot of resources and challenges that we're facing as a Muslim community that can be solved, by ourselves, without causing, disruptions in practicing our faith. And so what we've realized at Tarteel is like the Islamic ecosystem, the technology ecosystem as a whole needs a paradigm shift. And this is one of our goals at Tarteel is, essentially helping reignite the Islamic Golden Age, where, previously Muslim scholars were well known to be, like Al-Khwarizmi, Abu Sina. They were pioneers in their fields, and we're hoping that, we can encourage other Muslims to also be pioneers in their fields, in the current day and age, inshallah. A little bit about what we've been doing at Tarteel. So over the last 2 years, we've led the redevelopment of the new Quran.com site. So for those of you that use Quran.com, most of that work was championed, alhamdulillah, by us and one of our previous co-founders, Abdul Latif. We rebuilt the site from scratch using, the latest technologies and including some of Tarteel's technologies in it as well, in the hopes of, delivering a better and improved experience for Muslims around the world. Currently, Quran.com has about 3 million monthly active users. During Ramadan, it peaks to around like 5 million monthly active users as well. We've worked with Masajid, to deliver, engaging content where, we help, mosques like Epic out in Dallas to basically live stream Taraweeh. So you'd have the Imam reciting, and then, you'd have Tarteel with like the translations on the side. So this way, if someone doesn't understand what's being recited, they can see in real time, what's out there. And then, as part of like our initiatives to help, encourage Muslims to engage with the Quran, we have, community activities such as, our annual Recite a Quran, Give a Quran challenge, where anyone who completes 75% or 70%, I already forgot, of the Quran using Tarteel during Ramadan, we donate a Quran on their behalf. So this is a bit about our work, a bit more about the current app and the current technology. So alhamdulillah, we were able to build over the last 2 years one of the first and arguably the smartest currently Quran AI application, where it basically uses speech-to-text technology to listen to your Quran recitation, identify what you're reciting, and highlight mistakes in real time. We automatically track your progress. You can search the Quran. You can see, similar verses where you make a mistake. It's a perfect application for people, who want to memorize and review their memorization. And, in the coming months, inshallah, we'll be working on getting higher fidelity speech recognition models that can recognize tashkil, tajweed, and, more nuanced, more vocal nuances, essentially, inshallah. So a little bit about our journey, and how we got up to this stage. This is definitely not like a overnight, a success or initiative. It's important to keep in mind that whenever you're building something new and you're building something from scratch and that has high value, it's not going to be a piece of cake. It's not going to be a walk in the park. Whatever you see on like Twitter or Facebook or TechCrunch, people tell you like, oh, these people make like $1 billion overnight or whatever. There's always like a story or a journey behind it. So it's important to keep that in mind, that there's always hard work behind everything. So Tarteel started out as part of like a hackathon project out in the Bay Area in 2019. It was called Muslim Hacks, essentially, where a group of folks basically got together and said, how can we build a speech recognition model that can recognize Quran recitation? So Tarteel started out just a data set collection project. We asked people to basically recite, a verse onto their computer. And then, one by one, they just manually recite verse by verse. And we did it this way so that, we can kind of minimize the amount of data processing that we had to do when collecting this data set. And this helped us, build essentially the first iterations of our speech recognition models later on. The team that worked on this, they all moved on to their own, projects. And so, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant them success. They were kind of like, the people who sparked the initiative, and, inshallah, they get the reward for all the work that's being done now as well. So this was the first part of, how we started building out the Tarteel's AI and speech recognition. It was essentially just asking people, from the community online, to essentially just recite the Quran, and we collect their data. Now, as alhamdulillah, we're able to actually build a experience, a good Quran experience in the app. We actually utilize the app itself to collect recitation. So whenever you use Tarteel, the audio that is used is stored, to be trained by, be trained for the AI, but it's also used for yourself, where if you want to share your recitation with someone else, or if you want to listen to it, in the future, and review your mistakes, you're able to do that. So we utilize, the app itself to essentially, build basically a feedback loop where, the more people that use the app, the better the better the experience becomes, and the better the AI performance becomes, essentially. So it's a pretty straightforward process. Whenever someone recites, the data is sent to our servers. It's processed by the AI model. We basically, we do the matching and we show you the results, but then we also store the audio data for training as well. And then the way it works is, the data that we get from the model is considered is what's called a pre-annotation. It's not something that has been labeled yet, it's just something that the model predicts. And so, we use that as an initial basically guess or hypothesis of what the actual text was. And then we try to identify where it is in the Quran. So just to make sure that what we got was accurate. And then once it's ready to be, labeled, we built our own internal team of, annotators using our own internal tools. Everything is, private and basically secured. So where we have control over everything. We don't use any third-party tools or platforms so that, we keep all the data and the information secure. But we have basically a team of high-quality annotators that review the audio, make sure the annotation is correct for the audio, and then we use that annotation to train the model and improve the performance. I'll stop here for a quick second. I just want to see, because there's like a bunch of stuff flying in the chat, and I want to make sure there's like any questions here. No questions. Okay, I think we're good. I'll keep looking at the chat, so if you have any questions, just like drop it in there and I'll try to answer it while I'm here. So once we collected all this data, we built our models, and we kind of we had like a product and everything. Obviously, we're not like building and hosting a model is not like any like your typical like SaaS or web app application where you can just like use Vercel or Heroku or whatever. Usually you need GPUs, which are pretty expensive, and AWS costs an arm and a leg for you to like host your models and everything. So the first iteration of Tarteel was literally on this computer, as you can see here, or this janky server. This was used both for training and for hosting some of our models. Basically taking, keeping it simple, stupid, or KISS for short, and being scrappy to its limits. This was basically like a miner rig that I bought off Amazon. And I threw a GPU on it and connected it, and we went off to the races. So it was a very janky setup. This was the first iteration. It didn't have to be perfect. Later on, once we started to scale out and that we realized we needed to have we had more users, we had more demand on our servers, we migrated over to AWS, and we had this whole complex configuration, which I won't go into because it didn't matter at the end of the day. We went from a very simple and stupid configuration to a very complex and well architected configuration. Me coming from AWS, I thought this was like all great and handy, and it was like, oh great, we built this like super complex, awesome architecture that is like resistant and whatnot. But it turned out we didn't even really need that, especially when you're a startup. When you're early stage, you don't want to add any complexity to your system. You want to try and be as simple as possible. You want to move fast. You want to be able to quickly iterate on things, and complexity usually prevents you from doing so. So whenever you're thinking about having your own startup or a project, there's no reason to be perfect from the first iteration. It's always fine to be scrappy and simple from the get-go. But basically the TLDR of this image is right here. Is like you have the mobile app. It streams audio from the native layer off to our application, which has like a load balancer, and then AWS has a thing called an ECS cluster, which manages all your like EC2 instances. And then the EC2 instances have a image from NVIDIA. We use one of their toolkits called Riva to deploy the speech-to-text model and then perform the inference in real time. We basically threw all that out the window, and we use this tool called Zeet, which is one of many hosting tools out there, which helped us move fast and ship things. So this is basically like a nice lesson in saying don't make things too complex from the start. Keep things simple, offload whatever you can, and focus on like your core value proposition as like a startup or as a company, as opposed to trying to over engineer and build complex things. So this is our journey from building the model, building the app, and kind of like also a bit of the technical insights into how we like deployed and hosted the GPU, and like how hosted the model on like GPUs and on AWS. The question now is, what's next for us? Alhamdulillah, we've built an app that's being used by over 100,000 Muslims. It's being used by thousands of people every day. Thousands of hours are being recited, alhamdulillah, and we're delivering value to people. And there's still a lot of work ahead of us, but in terms of the current app itself, but there's also a lot of work that we can use to expand and deliver value to other spaces. So right now, the way we think about it is we're basically a B2C app, so we're delivering value to like individual consumers, and we're able to do that, using the individual application. But there's a lot of schools, institutes, masajid, mosques that need similar technology to help engage their congregants, improve their ability, their students' experience or the teacher's experience, in teaching their students the Quran, and improving the overall like educational workflow around memorizing and reciting the Quran. As well as building a community, which is some of the things that we're trying to do as part of today, is how do we build this community of Muslim entrepreneurs and Muslim technologists and innovators that want to help out, that want to build innovative solutions for the Muslim community. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done there that inshallah I'll be diving into in this next section. Take a quick look at the chat. Okay, so I think we're still there's no questions here. So now I guess my question to you guys is like, what's next for you? What I just described is basically one solution or one application to solving a need for the Muslim community. And it's very limited. It's very niche currently in its current form and stage, where it's it's optimized for people who are memorizing or who want to revise. Inshallah, in the future, we're able to support people who want to learn, who want to have do like the Qad Nuraniya or something like that. But there's still a lot of missing tools and building blocks in the space that needs to be put out there. We don't have that luxury like other SaaS applications. Like at this point, there's like 500 different tools to like deploy website or like to host like your next e-commerce or web app or whatever. And there's a lot of these building blocks out there for building all these tools and companies and whole ecosystem out there for building different things. But we don't have that in the Islamic ecosystem. You have that in the e-commerce space, you have that in the education space, you have that in just the general SaaS space. There's a lot of solutions and building blocks there, but we don't have that for the Muslim ecosystem. So then I'll start with the buzzwords for sure. What are some of the next frontiers that that we can explore in this space? People like to throw dump a bunch of garbage on Web3, and some of it there's like valid concerns and issues with the space, and there's there is a concern in terms of like the way things are being set up, the way the community is like. But there are certain solutions that, there are certain technologies and solutions that can actually help meet the use cases that we have as a Muslim community. And so one of the most important things is, having a decentralized platform for Quranic resources. What we've noticed is basically there's like two main resources where literally everyone gets the Quran, which is tanzeel.net and Quran.com. And that's basically like 2 points of failure. And they've been doing, mashallah, amazing work to like support the needs of and the use cases of the wider community. Like hundreds of apps have probably been built on top of the resources that they have, but it's very difficult to maintain and scale such an initiative if it's just centralized to like one location, one database, or like a single server. And then like basically the person that's running it is like a single individual. What happens if he gets sick, or he loses a job, or he can't work on the resource anymore? Then you're basically stuck in a situation where you have all these like amazing tools and resources, but you can't push it forward. So having a decentralized platform where you have all this Quranic content, which is like the text, the images, the tafsir, all this information, instead of hosting it in a single place, you can use something like IPFS or Filecoin or Arweave, where you can store all this information in a decentralized fashion, and this way anyone can access it. You can see the actual records, when something was accessed, when it was modified, and you can you have like provable guarantee that something that you got was not modified. It's immutable, it's persistent, and anyone that tries to censor the site or whatever, they're going to have trouble doing so, because instead of being hosted in one place, it's hosted all over the world. One of the other frontiers is semantic search. So, Google is itself, it uses ads and everything, but one of the main use cases of Google is, it's a search engine where you can basically type in anything and you get the answers you want. But as we've seen, there's a lot of Muslim bias. There's a lot of bad news out there where, you search or if you put in a model, something related to like Muslims or Islam, or even in Google, like the first thing you'd get is like related to like terrorism and all this mumbo jumbo that people try to associate us with. Instead, what we need to do is we need to build, our own version of semantic search, which has basically different layers um, of understanding where, we start at the baseline text, being able to search the Quran, which is something we have in Tarteel. But then the next step is like, okay, how can I search an understanding of specific words like, law or marriage or family relationships, like, being able to search certain certain domains and, certain words and references is basically the next layer on top of that. And then, how do we tie in the seerah? Because the Quran wasn't just, dropped down, on random occasions. There's, certain occasions where like certain verses come in, where if you don't have the proper context and you don't understand the historical, context for it, doesn't make sense, or you might not understand what the verse is actually referring to. So having that context embedded into the search is something that's very important. And lastly, what's more important is to actually address the needs of the different madhahib and the fiqhs. The different scholars is, having that scholarly commentaries, us ourselves, sometimes we try and understand certain verses, but as lay people, we're not the best at interpreting the Quran. People have spent like hundreds of years, there's decades of work that's been put out there in terms of trying to understand and, address the meanings of the Quran, the meanings of the Seerah, and the meanings in the Sunnah and the Hadith. And so imbuing that information into semantic search is something that'll be very valuable and help people understand Islam and understand the verses in the Quran without any bias or without any false or misaligned interpretations, essentially. Question. So I have a quick question here. Would you see an API opened up? There's a few other questions which actually I'll move towards the end, since they're a bit more relevant towards the end. Would you see an API opened up for other Quran apps in the future? I mean, there's APIs out there, like in terms of like Quran.com, Al Quran Cloud, Tanzeel. They all have APIs, and I think those are like great resources to use, and like we use them ourselves. Us right now, we don't have any APIs just because internally, like we're still a mess. If that previous image of a GPU, hosted on a server, like, gave you an indication of how our inner workings are, that's kind of how it is. Things are constantly changing, things aren't moving. And so we can't guarantee stability for basically third-party stakeholders. So ideally, yes, we would have some sort of API, but even then, we don't want to be the people hosting that API. We want it to be something that's centralized, that's decentralized, that's available for everyone, where anyone can go back and see, okay, this is the source of truth. If there was a mistake, we know when it was appended, we know when it was added, and when we know it was fixed. And, that way you don't have to worry about a single source for getting your information. You go back to this decentralized platform, which has all the information available for you and for other Quran apps in the future. Next frontiers also is content. So, once you have this like basic building blocks of like, you have the text, you have this decentralized platform, for example, which hosts all this information for you. The next question is like, how do you actually get all this information, put it into one place, and spread it out towards everyone around the world? So some of the content that needs to be put out there, we already have some text, we have translations, we have tafsir, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done here, especially in terms of like the font space. Right now there's like only two fonts that are well used, which is like, the King Fahd Complex and Indo-Pak. But the Quran isn't written in one font. There's like, different writing styles. There's different ways of people, reading the Quran, in the subcontinent, in Malaysia, and in the US, and in the GCC region. There's different ways of representing the Quran. And it's important for us to provide the digital tools and resources to represent that properly and accurately. We've had many times issues with, iPhones and Androids and, websites that don't represent the Quran properly just because of like, weird Unicode issues or font issues. And so being able to have, a dedicated set of resources that's available for Muslim communities around the world, not just people who are coming, from Saudi or using the Medina Mus'haf, but people who are coming from like Pakistan, from India, they can use the Indo-Pak Mus'haf. People from Maghreb, Libya, they can use like the Welsh Mus'haf. So they have all these resources available to them that they can use to build, other, applications. One thing that we're working on internally, which, maybe we'll be able to release soon, is like automated time stamping, where, a lot of, if you go on Instagram and TikTok, there's a lot of reciters out there that put their content, mashallah, beautiful voices, but it's actually very difficult work to take that content and put it in a video form in a way that's consumable by us, in a way that, is valuable for us. And so automating some of that pipeline will be very helpful for these content creators to put out, Quranic content that is valuable for us Muslims, that we enjoy, that's something that's related to our faith, as opposed to like the rubbish that we see on TikTok and Twitter. So putting all this together, what exactly is needed here? So if we put this into like, concrete steps, basically what we need is a consistent set of building blocks that help us contextualize the Quran towards different mediums. We have different platforms, different resources, but what's the baseline infrastructure and building blocks that we can use, that anyone in the world could come in and say, I want to build X project or X resources, this is what I want to use. Like, I want to make sure that one guy recently came to us like, how can I moderate like YouTube comments, for example, to like make sure like there's no hateful like comments, and provide actually the right context for people when they provide hateful comments on like Twitter or YouTube or whatever, to say like, no, actually, you should, if this hateful comment was given, you should actually refer them to this verse, which actually addresses their need or their question properly and whatnot. The other thing is, I'm saying this to myself first and foremost, but don't build another Quran app. There's 100 Quran apps out there. We started out ourselves, we started our own to be able to actually explore the space and understand what's needed to be built out there in terms of like the speech-to-text technology, just because it was the first time, we were actually exploring the space. But there's 100 Quran apps out there. If you search Quran, like on your Google Play or App Store, you'll find 100 apps, and 90% of them offer the same features. There's probably only 3 or 4 out there that offer something that's actually unique in terms of like unique tool set, like Quran Majid or Muhafiz and whatnot, that actually give you some sort of value. But instead, the kind of the thought process you want to put yourself in is, okay, the Quran is our resource, the Quran is our text. How can I use that, or how can I leverage that as part of a solution or technology that addresses a need that I personally have faced, or that I've seen someone else face while they're practicing. Something that's interesting, for example, is like there was like I think it was like a prayer mat that kind of like shows you that has like a camera, and it shows you like whether you're praying properly or incorrectly. That thing was like on Kickstarter. I don't know what happened, if it was launched or anything, but that's the kind of mindset you want to put yourself in. Is like, there's hundreds of prayer mats out there, and there's like hundreds of designs out there, and like in the end of the day, they're all being used to help you, facilitate your prayer. What's a way you can basically think of like a solution or technology that not only you yourself, could benefit from, but others could build on top of and benefit from as well. And then the end goal that you want to keep in mind here is the goal is not to put ads. The goal is not to make money. Ideally, yes, you want to make money to be able to support yourself. And, if anyone tells you you shouldn't be making money off like, these Islamic apps or whatnot, unfortunately, we don't have like a waqf. We don't have an Ottoman Empire to, fund all the Islamic projects. We call these people at Tarteel free sabilillah. They want everything free for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And, they don't want to support the resources when they realize like, if you're actually getting value from something, like there's a cost associated with it, and it needs some sort of financial backing. Like you can't just, it's hosting GPUs and hosting these services and whatnot isn't something that's cheap, and you shouldn't, make your work cheap. You shouldn't basically put yourself out there for free. Rather, build something that's valuable that people would be willing to pay for, and use that as not as a motivation, but as a way to support your work, to improve the work that you're doing so that you can deliver more value towards Muslims. But back to my original point is the end goal that you want to have in mind whenever you're working on this stuff is how do you instill in every Muslim, any madhab, any, what do you call it, background that they follow, a strong and close relationship with the Quran, by reimagining the way that's digitized, it's distributed and engaged with. And something to keep in mind is the hadith, that if you guys are going to work on something, then perform it with perfection. Make sure that I might be a bit of a hypocrite here, where I mentioned before, like, oh, you don't have to be perfect, but the end goal that you want to keep in mind is that you're striving towards perfection. Like, we as Muslims, we shouldn't settle for anything less than beautiful, good experiences. A few people that I've asked is basically like one of the reasons like we have like bad apps and bad actors in the space, like Muslim Pro and all these like apps and whatnot, is like Muslims settle for BS basically. So I'm not gonna say the word here, but and a few people have mentioned this. I think it was I forgot, it was a Shadaman Law, or probably was like a Muslamic co-founder or something. But Muslims basically settle for less, and we as Muslims, like, we're instructed to not do that. Like, we should not settle for less. We need to be perfect. We need to strive for perfection, and we need to show that in the tools and the work that we do, and in basically like all the work that we do. I'll pause here for a second. Zahad, do I have a minute here just to show some bloopers?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So one of the projects that we've been working with is called Luther AI. They built the open source version of GPT-3, which is like GPT-J, and now they're working on an open source version of DALL-E, which is called Lion. Also, actually, before I forget, before I jump to bloopers, we are hiring. This is an important part. Alhamdulillah, we actually just closed on like a senior mobile and a senior ML engineer recently, but we are looking for a marketing manager. So if you have experience with being a social media guru or whiz, or have experience with running Facebook campaigns and ad campaigns and engaging with like influencers and whatnot, please do apply. We're looking for talented candidates in this space. The link is here. I think the easier one to use is these go to the same link, but the tiny URL /Tarteel-mm. This will probably be an easier one to work with. I'll actually put this in the chat real quick so you guys can copy pasta easily, in case anyone is interested. So yeah, in terms of bloopers, so there's it's a work in progress. There's an open source version of DALL-E. For those of you that don't know, DALL-E is an image generation model where if you give it text, it'll generate like an image of what that text is, or at least it'll try. So there's an open source version of it called Lion that's being used, and we recently got access to it. It's currently trained on kind of like an aesthetic data set image generation, and it's not fully trained yet. But what's interesting is some of the inputs that we gave it is like, this one is like man praying in Mecca at night with stars shining in the sky. I don't know what he's trying to do here, but you can see like for some reason it's kind of like upside down person praying in the night sky. These are like for the same input image, some of the other essentially like outputs it gives. It's very interesting to see that night sky theme, or the stars shining, but it misses like the man praying in Mecca. But it does get that prayer theme here as well. This is one thing that was pretty interesting. 3 Muslims praying in Mecca with the Quran. It seems like if you give it more than one Muslim, it'll give you 1 billion Muslims. So maybe it doesn't understand numbers yet, but it's very interesting to see the kind of how you have that Medina style umbrellas here instead of the Meccan style umbrellas. And when you give it like a number of Muslims, like instead it gives you like instead of saying like 1 or 3, it gives you like a bunch of them. This is an interesting output. This is also a very cool vintage photograph of the Kaaba in Mecca. You can see what's very interesting here that we were discussing this on our Discord channel, is like the model understands that there is a central location for the Kaaba in Mecca, where, for example, like especially in this first picture, you can see that there is a mosque in the center of this space and that there's people around it. But it doesn't know what the Kaaba looks like. And this is likely because we don't know what the data set looks like that was trained on. But it's likely because the model hasn't seen like what a Kaaba looks like and it hasn't been labeled as such. And so the model can't really extrapolate towards the information. And to be fair, if you ask someone who didn't see the Kaaba like what it looks like, they wouldn't know. But it has an understanding of like what that region looks like, and you can see this as well in another prompt where like birds flying over the Kaaba in Mecca during a rainstorm. Like arguably, this kind of image on the right is tending towards like a Kaaba, and like it kind of gets like the haram style like understanding of what the haram looks like. And there's similar iterations here. One person commented is like, this is like Tayr Ababil. It's like from Surah Al-Fil. This is an interesting observation. So yeah, this is kind of bloopers from a recent model that we have here. I will start going into questions unless there's anything else you guys want me to cover.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you very much, Jazakallah for that presentation. Very interesting, especially this last part about the Kaaba. And you can literally see it trying to draw it without actually knowing what it looks like. It's like when you ask a child to draw a human and they sort of draw the face and then like the legs come out of the head, and then when they're 3 years old they've got a little body, and then when they're older than that they've got like biceps and stuff. So you can literally see it trying to get there. And also it was very interesting, and the reason I like hosting these events is because you shared your insight into like what you see as being popular in the future, and you mentioned things like Web3 and semantic search. So that's definitely where I'm going to put my money in the stock market. I believe in you to be a smart person, so hopefully that pays off. In terms of questions, I've got a few here that came in through DMs, and some people left some in the chat. I'll fire away and then you can have a crack at answering them. Does that work for you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. And if anyone else has any questions, just put them in the chat. If you'd like to come on mic or camera to ask your question, just press the reaction button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand, and I'll call you up to ask your question or make a comment. You don't have to ask a question if you don't have one. So we have a question from Mujtaba. It says, what is it that you have experienced as a Muslim founder that you wouldn't have experienced as a non-Muslim founder? Did you take funding from investors and or join any incubators?
I'll answer this in the reverse order. We joined Mass Challenge, which is like a non-profit, or like it's a free accelerator. It's more well known in like Texas and on the East Coast. And so that was kind of like an accelerator we went through. It was like they didn't give you any funding or whatnot, but they kind of like paired you with mentors, and they had like some, co-working space, free coffee. And I will say no. I never say no to free coffee. And so we joined that early on. We didn't get much value out of it because we were still building out the product, and we weren't ready for solving like a lot of the business problems. We did apply to other accelerators. Like we did get interviewed at YC very early on. That was like during the data set collection phase. And their feedback was like, it's too early, and we're not sure if there's like a market for it yet. We did, however, take funding from investors. There are Muslim angels and Muslim investors that we took funding from. We did try to look into taking money from VCs as well. And one very interesting experience is like and this was pre-COVID, a lot of VCs were very hesitant to enter and learn more about the religious space just because of a lot of the stigma around it. But it wasn't until I think, was it the Bible app, or I'm trying to remember what the name of one of these Christian apps was. One of these Christian apps, it was literally just like a meditation and content platform, received like funding from a VC. I'm trying to remember, blanking out on the names here. But they're starting to have parallels in the Christian community where VCs are putting their money in, and they're starting to see that there's actually a way of generating a profit. Like it is a potential like, business opportunity there. And so we're starting to see parallels there. And now YC, I think, recently has started to invest in Muslim fintech companies. I'm trying to remember. I'm blanking out completely on names here, but there's a few Muslim companies that got into YC recently, that are more geared towards fintech as opposed to lifestyle. But there has been initially kind of like negative sentiment, and we've seen that clearly. Like people are like, why would you take VC money? Like it'll dilute, your mission and whatnot. And we internally, we've set up our company as a benefit corporation as opposed to a C corp, where legally, our goal as a company is not to maximize profit, but rather it's to meet or to address like a certain mission statement, and that's basically to serve the Muslim community. So we're a for-profit company. We can make money, we can take investments, and that's something that supports our work. But at the end of the day, like we don't have basically a fiduciary, like we don't have like a complete fiduciary duty towards like, maximizing profit at all costs. No, the goal is to benefit the Muslim community at the end of the day. So this is kind of, the sentiments and the stigma that was currently before COVID. I think now it's changing. And even like Saudi Arabia and these GC Gulf countries are starting to explore and open that space.
Okay, cool. Arthur said that one of the.
Arthur mentioned it. The ML Invest. That's the company. Yes.
Cool. You spoke a little bit about funding as a Muslim founder, founding a Muslim-focused company. The question also asked, were there any other experiences that you had as a Muslim founder compared to being, we can only hypothetically speak, a non-Muslim founder? Perhaps you walk into a room of other founders. What sort of reception did you get? Did you feel it was any different? Do you think there were any opportunities that you might have not been able to access because you're focusing on a Muslim first app?
No, I think it's just like investor sentiment at the end of the day, is like in terms of accessing funding, but like that's just a means to an end. When I'd enter a room to like other people, like the first reaction is always like, wow. Like even non-Muslims understand, like they see the app like transcribe something in real time. They can see how, like, even though they don't understand, but they're just like, wow, this is like actually working. Like, people are very intrigued and very interested in like seeing the technology work. And at the end of the day, the problems that we have as like a early stage company is the same problems like any other company has. Like you have to find product market fit, you have to do marketing, you have to do, sales and outreach and customer support, and the same problems that we have. Like you can walk into any room with like a founder's design studio. Like we're part of one out in the Bay Area. I visited them like one day, and we were just talking about like our stories and the work that we do, and it's like the concepts are all the same. It's just the target audience is different, the app or the experience in the platform is different, but a lot of the experiences that you have as like an individual founder is like it's a shared experience. It's shared set of principles that you just use everywhere else. Yeah,
absolutely. And do you have any thoughts on the importance of Muslims owning this particular space through entrepreneurship? Do you think there's a preference towards Muslim building apps for Muslims rather than letting other demographics into that space?
Oh yeah, I mean we know ourselves more than anyone else. Like we have this like liberal agenda trying to impose its own like viewpoints on us. Like we know our religion. Like we're born with it. We pray 5 times a day. We recite the Quran. Like we know ourselves better, and we have the right context and understanding that will help us unlock the right insights to actually deliver value, to our community. And so, sure, like you can bring some entrepreneur from Europe or whatever who has like a business background. At the end of the day, like, and this is something we've seen ourselves, is like when we ask like non-Muslim, advisors or whatnot, people like who are like experts in the space, like marketing and whatnot, they give you the insights that are related to marketing, but how do you translate that over to like what Muslims want and what Muslims need? And it's arguably a bit different because we're more faith and belief oriented, and we have a set of principles and values that we abide by that other people are more lax and less strict with. And alhamdulillah, this is like one of the blessings of Islam, is like we have a set of principles that guide us, and we stick to it, we're able to adhere to it, and it's common amongst these like 2 billion Muslims, and that's like something that's absolutely amazing and beautiful. And so there's no reason that anyone else should enter into our space. There's a bunch of us out here. Why should we let anyone else? And I'm not saying this from kind of like, just cutting someone out, but ideally the right person to solve the problems for Muslims is a Muslim. So yeah.
Yeah, well said, well said. We have a question from Yusra, and it's are you planning to develop tools for Islamic scholars or students? Question mark. For example, helping them searching for knowledge or maybe comparing different opinions.
Yes, this was part of the we did a brainstorming session on this, and this was kind of the thing that we discussed in terms of like semantic search. We've discussed this as well, and something to keep in mind is, as a Muslim, like there's 2 billion Muslims, but there's different sects, there's different madhabs, there's different, ideologies and means of like practicing and being spiritual. And so it's very difficult to enter into a content development space and providing scholarly content without becoming non-sectarian. So it's a fine line that we need to tread on. And so the thing that we wanted to focus on internally is building the infrastructure necessary for someone else to come in, plug in on top of that, and build their own resources. So this way, if someone, from, a certain, like, let's say a Maliki wants to have his scholarly content, we could do that in the future. But one thing that we've been very cautious of is making sure like we don't, do anything that might be incorrect in terms of from religious perspective. Like we might be spreading something that's incorrect or invalid. Alhamdulillah, we do have some scholars on our team who are advisors and even investors who we refer to and help us out. But there's always a fine line that we need to make sure that we tread on in terms of if we're putting content out there, we need to make sure that it's like baseline authentic text that's like irrefutable, as opposed to something that's kind of like commentary or opinions or like something related to like like fiqh related issues, something that a scholar is more geared towards addressing to. Building the tools for them, yes, but building the content or like spreading it is not something that we're probably going to go into that space, but the tools for them, yes. So yeah, just to clarify there.
Cool. Yusra, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, feel free to ask a follow-up in the chat or raise your hand.
One thing that I wanted to answer is very interesting, is like more technical. As well as the thought process behind migrating from ECS and AWS to Z. It's just complexity. Since I was at AWS, I was biased towards building something on AWS, and they drilled into us, this kind of like, well architected, well solutioned architecture, blah, 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 yada, yada. At the end of the day, it was a load of bogus just to get you to use more AWS resources and give them more money. Oh,
we've lost you.
Yeah, I lost my we just lost electricity here in the the house, so I don't look too scary in the dark. I think I'll stop my video just until the electricity comes back, but I'll be on my phone. Is my voice clear?
Yeah, your voice is perfect.
Yeah. So in terms of the thought process behind migrating from ECS to Z, one is basically minimizing complexity. We didn't have to manage the infrastructure, and things just worked out of the box. And so it's easier and better for us. Like we're like our time is worth money, and it's cheaper for us, to pay someone else to take care of all this added complexity and simplify everything, as opposed to us trying to build things on ourselves. Just to keep in mind, like Z works on top of AWS, by the way. It works on top of like Google. Electricity's back. That's good. It works on top of Google and works on top of like other like cloud providers. But as long as it abstracts all that complexity away, like that's the important thing for us. And so this way, like instead of me trying to like manually like auto scale like our services and whatnot, I just like push a button in the Z console, and like instead of having 10 GPUs, I now have 50 GPUs. So that's basically the thought process behind it. Later on, as you grow as a company and you start to have like 10, 20 like engineers, and things become, you scale up, okay, then it makes sense to invest more time into this stuff. But when early on, like the goal is to deliver value to your customers, and that's like your focus, not over engineering things.
Cool, brilliant. I think maybe you should turn the GPU off for a bit so that you're not using up your electricity for our call. Or maybe this is just how you
Someone's mining Bitcoin out here.
Or maybe you're just plugging the startup grind and hustle to any potential investors in the chat. But
Yeah.
we had another question from Yusra, which is, why do you not consider open sourcing some of the Tarteel.com projects and have developers in the community around it? I know we had a very quick chat about building community around Tarteel. Would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, for sure. We had a data set, the first data set we collected, we had it open source for a good like year or two. Only one person used it, and anyone else who tried to use it didn't really continue follow up on that. So we took it down because no one was using it, and B, we also discovered some issues with the labels. It's been on my backlog to put this out, and even Ahmed, my co-founder, bugs me about it every month or so. It's like, or even Update, he's in the chat right here. Is like, when are we gonna put this out? When are we gonna make this open source? Like, I personally don't mind, and I want to put the resources out there to help other people build on top of the work that we're done. But for this specific use case, like the data set, isn't clean, it's not complete, and it's slightly like the labels aren't correct. So I'm worried that if we do put this data set out there, like we might be causing more issues than solutions. And so internally we want to clean this up before we publish it again. And then the same goes for like our APIs. We have a lot of tools internally that we've been using that could potentially be open source in terms of like as a service, and this is something we've experimented with Quran.com. But it's just that internally, like things are just so unstable. Like we change things every like 2-3 weeks, and APIs change, and things change. If we have stability and there's something that we can maintain and provide to others as a service, I think that's great, and I think we'd be more than open to doing that. But it's just internally, us as a team, like we don't have the right resources to maintain it, and which is why I brought up that decentralized approach, where instead of us hosting the services and the information, why don't we just host it in a decentralized manner? And this way, anyone can access it in any way, shape, or form, and you don't have to worry about like hosting and whatnot, and we're not like a single source of failure. So I'm 110% aligned with like having open source tools and delivering content and whatnot for the community. Is just, I think at this stage we're not in the best place to add that. I think we like I'm guilty of this. Like we should prioritize this, but it's just internally we just haven't had the bandwidth to do so. So this is a fault on us, and it's like something that we recognize, and inshallah like we'll be able to work on in the coming months.
Inshallah. There's a question here that I got as a DM, so I won't reveal the name, and I'll twist it a little bit. So the person's asking, how would you find a co-founder if you don't have tech experience yourself? Can you shed some light onto the approach you took or have taken, either to build up your team or to find co-founders for your business and your app, and what worked well and what didn't work quite so well for those out there that might be looking to build their own app or startup?
I missed you there because my Wi-Fi dropped, but I'm gonna assume you said like what worked and what didn't work for us.
When you're looking for co-founders or people to join the team.
Yeah, that's a very good question. You should treat the co-founder process like a marriage process. That's that's my learning, honestly, because it's not as serious, of course, like you're not making a lifetime commitment, but it's very important to find the right fit and the right individual. Early on, if things happen and things break apart, that's fine. It's a learning experience for everyone. But later on, if things aren't the right fit and things escalate, it can cause problems in the future. And so that's why you have these hackathons. That's why you have these projects and get-togethers, is to kind of network and meet different people and work on like small projects inside things, so that when it comes to a point where like, oh, you're actually interested in working with this kind of individual, and you want to push things forward with them, then you can be like, okay, we're ready to take this on together as a full-time. We're ready to work together, acknowledge responsibilities, be able to motivate each other, uphold each other, keep ourselves responsible, keep ourselves accountable, and basically being able to take the slack whenever someone can't take it. Because at the end of the day, as a co-founder, like, you can't operate in the mentality of an employee. You have to operate in the mentality of like, this is my baby, and like, if I don't take care of my baby, it's gonna die. And you guys are the parents, and so that's why I'm kind of like, uh, I hate to put it this way, but like that's the way I think about it personally. And so um, uh, early on, like, you want to get involved in as many projects as you want, work on things on the side, get involved with the open source community, and build things out there. And then usually you find people through like hackathons, networking events, over lunch or whatever, people that you can basically vibe with, and that you can depend on as like a co-founder to build a company. They don't necessarily have to be technical, but if they have the grit and they have the willingness and the energy to build something, then that makes sense. So I hope that answered the question.
I think that's all the questions that I've received. If I've missed any or you have any more, please ask them now. Whilst Anas, you can tell us how we can support the journey, follow along, get involved. Where do we find you online? Where do we find Tarteel online? Where can we find the app?
I'll dump that right here. So we have a very simple URL. You can download the app. Essentially, just go to download.tarteel.ai. The best way to support us is buying a premium subscription. At this stage, is sharing with friends and family. Giving us feedback in the app. We listen to all the feedback. Our messages, like, we have so much customer support messages, but we do our best to always like respond and listen to feedback and listen to our users. That's an important thing for us. Really, like, I think a few takeaways is basically, build yourself as a Muslim in terms of like, go out there, work at the Deloittes, the AWSs, the Facebooks and whatnot. Go work at these big companies, learn from them, learn from their experiences. I worked only a year at AWS, and I actually would have preferred if I worked another year there to kind of make more mistakes, to learn more, and to take some of those learnings from like a situation where I had the opportunity to do so, and then just take all those learnings and then like over the course of like 2-3 years, and then transfer that into solutions for your local community. You don't have to impact 1,000 or 10,000 Muslims, but if you can impact your local masjid, and like you can deliver impact for 1 to 10 people like in your local community, then that means there is a way for you to impact thousands of people around the world. You don't have to start at a large scale. Start out like a small scale, deliver value to people, find something that actually makes sense. The business models and stuff, they come along. The business models change all the time, and don't worry early on too much about making money. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's the Razzaq, he's the one who gives you your rizq, and he's the one who opens the doors for you. Like, after Ramadan, like, I still remember, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala closed so many doors for myself, like personally, and like also like a bit at Tarteel, but then interestingly enough, like, he opened up so many other doors like that just saved us like on so much money, on so much time. And at the end of the day, like, keeping, like, if you have the intention, you're working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just know that he will take care of you somehow, some way, and have that mentality in mind, have that thing in mind as you work towards supporting, working on a Muslim project, or working in this space. And people will dissuade you. People will tell you like you're wasting your time. You're gonna have the free sabilillah people. I think someone called us like we're kafir and stuff at one point. And so you're gonna have your haters. You're gonna have the people that actually enjoy what you're doing. Take all of that in. Take all the feedback. Use it to actually build something that's valuable, and find the right people who will help you to do so. That's what I want to see. Is like, I want to see other people out there like do better than us, and be better, inshallah. And like hopefully we can also soon, like in the coming months, be able to like provide the necessary tools for other people to build and uplift their communities around them.
Some great words to finish there. Jazakallah khair again for joining us. It's been a real pleasure hosting you. I've learned tons from this session. For those that are asking, yes, this session is recorded. It will be on YouTube soon enough. A reminder, if you do want to work with someone who's great at speaking like this and very talented, of course, working on a great project, Tarteel are hiring. I've just put a link in the chat again. What we usually do now is we do some breakout rooms for networking. For those that want to stick around, please do. If you don't or you need to run, you can log off now. But what we do is we break it into small rooms of about maybe 5 to 6 people each. Gives you a chance to speak to others from the community, ask questions, get to know each other. And to kick things off, we usually try and use a controversial question, and that gets people talking. So the question this time is all things considered, is AI good or bad for humanity? So have a think about that. I'll give a couple of minutes for those that don't want to join to leave, and everyone else to stay. And Anas, will you be staying for a bit longer?
Yeah, why not?
Oh, brilliant.
I have many discussion points on this.
Excellent. I'll just set up breakout rooms now. So